Alright, Chapter 7. This is it, boys. Oahu was still ringing from the Pearl Harbor attack. The roads were pocketed with bomb craters. The island was a constant alert for attack or invasion, and so camouflaged, a serviceman wrote, "One sees only about one-third of what is actually there. At night it disappeared. Every window had light-proof curtains, every car had covered headlights, and blackout patrols forbade any of the striking of a match. Servicemen wore gas masks and hip holsters. Surfers had to warm under barbed wire running along Waikiki Beach." There he is there, actually. That's him in the barracks. At Kauai Air Base on Oahu's North Shore, Louis and Phil were assigned to a barracks with Mitchell, Monsnet, 12 other officers, and hordes of mosquitoes. "You kill one," Phil wrote, "and 10 more come to the funeral." The barracks, Phil added, looked like a dozen dirty Missouri pigs had been wallowing on it. The non-stop revelry didn't help. One night, as Louis and Phil wrestled over a beer, they plowed down 3 wall partitions. One William Matthey, their colonel, saw the wreckage. He grumbled that Zamperini must have been involved. Everyone was eager to fight, but there was no combat. In its place was sea search, dull day-long ocean-flying patrols overseen by a lieutenant everyone hated. A nitpicker and rank-puller, he had loathed thanks to an incident in which one Superman's engines quit in mid-flight. If you remember, Superman is their name of their plane that they fly. When Phil returned to the plane to base, the furious lieutenant ordered them back up. When Louis offered to fly on 3 engines if the lieutenant joined them, the lieutenant abruptly changed his mind. The tandem of sea search made practical joking irresistible. When a ground officer griped about airmen's higher pay, the crew invited him to fly the plane. They sat him in the co-pilot's seat while Louis hid under the navigator's table by the yoke control chains. When the officer took the yoke, Louis tugged the chains, making the plane swoop up and down. The officer panicked. Louis smothered laughter, and Phil kept a poker face. The officer quit carping about airmen's pay. Louis' 2 most notorious pranks involved Phil, chewing gum, and their new co-pilot, a massive ex-football player named Charlton Cuppernell, who replaced Monzent when the latter joined another crew. In the first incident, after Cuppernell and Phil swiped his beer, Louis retaliated by jamming gum into the cockpit urine relief tube. On the next flight, the call of nature was followed by an explicitly brimming urine tube, turbulence, and at least 1 wet airman. Louis hid in Honolulu to escape punishment. So even still, while he is in the military, Louis is a practical joker and playing pranks on people. On the other occasion, to get even with the Cuppernell and Phil for stealing his gum, Louis replaced it with a laxative variety. Just before a long flight, Cuppernell and Phil each stole 3 pieces, triple the standard dose. As Superman flew, a pilot and co-pilot, in great distress, made alternating dashes to the back of the plane, yelling for someone to get a toilet bag. When the bags were used up, Cuppernell dropped his pants and hung his enormous rear out of the window while 4 crewmen clung to him to keep him from falling out. When the ground crews saw the results of the plane's tail, they were furious. "It was like an abstract painting," Louis said. Oh gosh, that's so gross. Phil's boredom remedy was hot dogging. Returning from sea search, he'd buzz Oahu so low he could look straight into the first floor windows of buildings. It was, he said, kind of daring. On the other days off, the crew played poker and divvied up Cece's care packages, and Louis and Phil tooled around in borrowed cars. Along the way, they came upon several airfields and were amazed to discover that all the planes and equipment were made of plywood, an elaborate ruse to fool Japanese flying reconnaissance. One day, this information could be very important. Paradise was the officers' club where there was beer and pretty girls with 10:30 curfews. When the crew got the squadron's best gunnery scores, Louis pinned officers' insignia to the enlisted men's uniforms and snuck them in. Just after Louis rose to dance with a girl, Colonel Matthey sat down in his place and began talking to the terrified Clarence Douglas, who was pretending to be a second lieutenant. When Louis ran to Douglas's rescue, the unsuspecting colonel got up and told him what a fine man Douglas was. On the dance floor, Louis spotted the hated lieutenant who'd ordered them to fly on their engines. He found a bag of flour, recruited a girl, and began dancing near the lieutenant, dropping flour down his collar with each pass. After an hour, the whole club was watching. Louis snagged a glass of water, dancing up behind his victim, dumped the water down his shirt, and took off. The lieutenant swung around his back, running with dough. Unable to find the culprit, he stormed out. Just before Christmas, the crew's hour finally came. Ordered to fly to Midway Island, they were greeted with a case of Budweiser and big news. The Japanese had built a base on Wake Atoll. In the Pacific War's biggest and yet America is going to burn it down. It would be a 16-hour mission, non-stop, pushing the B-24 as far as they could go. Even with auxiliary fuel tanks, they'd be cutting it extremely close. Auxiliary is extra tanks that they had on board. And there they are there, actually getting ready. On December 23rd, 1942, 26 B-24s lifted off the Midway runway. Superman slipped toward the rear. The planes flew through the afternoon and into night. At 11 p.m., Phil switched off the outside lights. Clouds closed in. Wake was very close now, but they couldn't see it. In the greenhouse, Louis felt a buzzing in himself, the same sensation he'd felt before races. Ahead, Wake slept. At midnight, Colonel Matthey piloted the lead plane, broke radio silence. "This is it, boys." Matthey sent his bomber plunging out of the clouds, and there was Wake. He barreled toward a string of buildings, hauled the plane's nose up, and yelled to the bombarder, "Where are we going to turn loose these incendiaries?" "Gone, sir." At the instant, the building exploded. Behind Matthey, wave after wave of B-24s dove at Wake. The Japanese ran for their guns. In Superman, well behind and above the leading planes, Louis saw throbs of light in the clouds. As Phil began the plane's dive, Louis opened the bomb bay doors, flipping his bomb switches, and fixed the settings. The orders were to dive to 4,000 feet, but when the plane reached that altitude, it was still in clouds. Louis' target was the airstrip, but he couldn't see it. Phil pushed the plane lower, moving at terrific speed. At 2,500 feet, Superman speared through the clouds, and Wake stretched out, sudden and brilliant, beneath it. The islands were a blaze of garnished light. Everywhere bombs were striking targets in mushrooms of fire. Searchlights swung about, their beams reflecting off the clouds and back into the ground, illuminating scores of Japanese in their sleeping clothes, sprinting in confusion. To Pillsbury, every gun in the world seemed to be firing skyward. Anti-craft guns lobbed shells over the plains where they erupted, sending shrapnel showering down. Tracer bullets emitting color to allow gunners to see where they were firing, streaking the air in yellow, red, and green. Watching the clamor of colors, Pillsbury thought of Christmas. Then he remembered they'd closed the international date line and past midnight. It was Christmas. Phil wrestled Superman out of its dive. Louis spotted the taillight of a Japanese Eurofighter plane rolling down the runway. He aimed for it. Very close, something exploded and Superman rocked. A shell burst by the left wing, another by the tail. Louis loosed a bomb over the Zero, then dropped his 5 other bombs over the bunkers and parked planes. Relieved by 3,000 pounds of bombs, Superman bobbed upward. Louis yelled, "Bombs away!" And Bill rolled the plane left through streams of aircraft fire. Louis looked down. His bombs landed in splashes of fire on the bunkers and planes. He missed the Zero, but had bullseyed the runway. Phil turned Superman back for Midway. Wake was a sea of fire and running men. As Superman flew home, Louis realized that they had a major problem. The bomb bay doors were stuck open. He climbed back and looked. When Phil had wrenched the plane out of its dive, the auxiliary fuel tanks had slid into the doors. Nothing could be done. With the open bay doors dragging against the air, Superman could burn right through its fuel. Given that this mission was stretching the plane's range to the limit, it was a sobering news. They could do nothing but wait. They passed around pineapple juice and sandwiches. Drained, Louis stared at the sky, watching the stars through breaks in the clouds. 75 miles away from Wake, one of the men looked back. He could see the island burning. As the day broke, General stood by the Midway airship, waiting for his bombers, his face furrowed. Fog hung low over the ocean, spilling rain. For the pilots, finding tiny Midway would be difficult, but there was a question of whether their fuel would last long enough. One plane appeared, then another, and another. By one, they landed, all critically low on fuel. Superman wasn't in sight. Out in the fog, Phil must have looked at his fuel gauge and known he was in trouble. With his bomb bay open and wind howling through the fuselage, he dragged away his fuel. He didn't know if he'd find Midway, and he didn't have enough fuel to fly around searching for it. At last he spotted the island. At that moment, one of Superman's engines sputtered and died. Phil nursed the plane along, aiming for the runway. The remaining engine kept turning. At touchdown, a second engine died. Moments later, the other 2 engines quit. Had the route been slightly longer, Superman would have hit the ocean. The general came running, smiling. Every plane had made it back. News of the raid broke, and the airmen were given medals and lauded as heroes. In the Honolulu Advertiser, that's a newspaper, Louis found a cartoon depicting his role in the bombing wake. He clipped it out and tucked it in his wallet. The men felt cocky. An admiral in Japan might be finished with a year. Phil heard men talking about going home. Methinks, he wrote to his mother, it is a little premature. And there's the plane, actually. This was being stuck, and then I think one of the engines had blown out. And that's it for chapter 7. That was a very short chapter. We're going to do probably our Google Meet after this to talk about the chapter. So hopefully you read this first before we do that. And then you're going to work on one of your projects that is due on Tuesday night. So if you have any questions, let me know. See me on Remind, Google Classroom. But we will be doing a Meet today to go over the chapter and to go over your projects you're going to be doing for the week. I'll talk to you soon. Bye, guys.